Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Peterborough Historical Society Public Lecture Series for the 2021-2022 season. Because of COVID-19, again this year, we will continue with our program of virtual lectures. The lectures will be given on Zoom at the scheduled time, with an opportunity for questions and answers and discussion following the lecture. The lectures, with the exception of the current one, will not be recorded for future viewing. Notice of lectures will be well publicized in advance. This month, we are pleased to have Kelly McDowell present a tour of the Hutchison House Herb Garden. Kelly is an herbal arts practitioner who works as a volunteer with the Hutchison House Herb Garden and will share her knowledge of the healing properties of numerous plants. The tour was pre-recorded and, as you will note, contains some neighborhood background sounds. You may find it helpful to adjust your audio volume at times during the tour. Welcome, Kelly McDowell.
All right, hi, my name's Kelly and I'm an herbalist. I volunteer with the Peterborough Community Medicine Garden, and we steward this garden. This garden was established in the mid-80s with the understanding that the house always had had a garden and probably had an herb garden, although there's no documentation to verify Dr. Hutchinson's use of herbal medicine. The herb garden was established by Jane Damon and was lovingly attended to by volunteers and headed up by Betty Hinton for over 2 decades. The Peterborough Medicine Garden partnered with Hutchison House 2 years ago to revitalize and rediscover the garden. It was a really exciting process because it felt like a little bit of archaeology, sorting through the weeds and trying to get a sense of what was intentional and what wasn't intentional. But as an herbalist, one of the most interesting things coming to this garden, there were so many new plants that I encountered that I had never met before, and mainly those were strewing herbs. And so there's a lot of lovely and not so lovely smelling plants here. The other really fascinating thing about just digging the garden up was it felt as though there were hidden stories. There were just lots of stories of how this plant came to be here, why this plant is here, what it was used for. What's coming to mind is a story that my teacher, Aubrey Arnoldson, speaks to in her book called The Weaving. And in the book, she imagines her ancestor, I think her name was Elsa, leaving Scotland, and imagining what that would have been like, to be leaving the only place you've known and the only place your family has ever known, and what the plants and seeds that she may have collected to bring, because these plants, there was a history. She was taught by her mother how to use these plants, and her mother's mother, and so in collecting the seeds of the plants that her ancestor tended, in some way she was bringing her ancestors with her, and so when I was sort of looking at these plants and finding these plants, that's what was coming up for me, was our ancestral connection to these plants. And there's a story it's sort of alongside the doctor's story, because there's Western medicine and the history of Western medicine, and we all know that this house was created because the community was desperate for a doctor. And the truth is that even with a doctor in town, the day-to-day ways in which we care for ourselves, in which we stay healthy, were outside of the standard medical domain. It really was the domain of the kitchen and the kitchen herbs. And so these herbs, like very common herbs like thyme and sage, which we now generally only associate with Turkey and the culinary arts, these plants also have profound medicinal qualities that would have been used as teas, as poultices, as a way of drying out phlegmy colds or moistening dry hacking coughs. Also lots of medicines for women's gynecological challenges, which the doctors really had no clue as. However, there was a long history. And so there was sort of modern history in the making, but there is also alongside it folk medicine that continued and continues to this day to be a valuable source of health and well-being. I love this garden because it has stories to tell. It's more than just a kitchen garden or even just an herbal garden. It's also in some ways a memorial to our sort of indigenous practices that have always been there and continue to be of deep interest to people, these connections to the plants. That being said, I also feel that it's really important that we acknowledge that we are on Anishinaabe, traditional Mississauga territory, and we brought these seeds here because we knew of their properties, we knew of the value that they brought us, and we didn't know what we were displacing. And so I feel as though when we're working with plants and we're working on the land, we have to acknowledge the histories that came before us, and that continue to live alongside each other in this garden. For the most part, these plants are from Europe, are European. A lot of them have been naturalized, so people assume that they're indigenous plants, like the echinacea, because we see it everywhere, or the dandelion, let's say, but these are European plants that have been naturalized. So this is hops. You can use it we can tincture it and use it for medicine, but you can also use it in pillows to help people sleep. It's rather bitter, so it's really great for the digestion system, but it's not, it's not for everybody. So one of the plants that I found fascinating, and we just brought this plant into the garden this year, and that's Angelica. We just put it in this year, so it hasn't flourished. Hopefully next year, they'll be coming in a little stronger. But Angelica was sort of the champion of the plague, actually. A monk, or I think it was a monk, had a dream that this plant could cure the plague, and it became a really important herb and medicine in the fight against the plague. And that's how it got the name of Angelica, because it was seen as an angel and as a gift from God. And it became, there's all kinds of laws that have been drawn up to control people stealing it, and if you carry a piece of it in your pocket, it's said to be really good luck, and so there's a long history with Angelica. And behind us is marshmallow. It's sort of past its peak. And marshmallow is really, if you touch the leaves, you can see it's really soft, and it has it's a moisturizing herb. Lots of plants are astringent and drying. So marshmallow is a beautiful plant because it helps bring moisture into the body. And so whether it's a dry gut, let's say from not enough water, and that also will help with constipation, but it will also help with a dry hacking cough. And you use both the leaves and the roots. It's just really, it was originally used in the confectionery marshmallow, but not anymore. It's not anymore. This one is apple mint, and contrary to a lot of mints, this one Oh, all mints are pretty robust, but this mint is really strong and has a beautiful flavor. Yeah, and it's, again, you know, we know it as a lovely tea, but it has a lot of deeply healing properties. It's really great. It's a carminative, so it means it will relax any spasms in the gut. So it calms the gut and it helps you digest, rest and digest. Pretty like every plant in this garden has a purpose, has many actually purposes, many qualities. So it's a little overwhelming. I don't even know where to begin. This one right here, it's been trimmed back. Here are the flowers. This is feverfew, and feverfew is really wonderful for migraines. It is said to cross the brain-blood barrier, and I can attest it has definitely helped with my migraines. But it also has the added qualities of being very bitter, which can make it difficult to consume, but it's really great for the gut. It also, sort of the bitters help stimulate bile production, and yeah, so it helps with the gut. And here's thyme, another sort of standard culinary herb, but it has lots of antibacterial, antimicrobial properties, so it's great for fighting a cold, great for a chest cold. So this one is called Soapwort, and I believe it does have some internal properties, but I'm not familiar with how it's used internally. But I know historically it's been used for soap and washing. So you can use the roots or the leaves and the fresh flowers. And to this day, I have a friend that uses it for her fine wools and silks. Yeah, this is St. John's wort. Again, we're just past the peak of everything, but St. John's wort was traditionally harvested on St. John's Day, which is midsummer, the summer solstice in Europe. It's such a, there's so much to say about this plant. It's quite fascinating. So it peaks at the summer solstice. If you look at the leaves, they have all of these little dots, and it looks like holes, but they're not actually holes. They're actually oil glands. And there's an oil, I think it's called hypericum is the oil. Yeah, where do we begin? This is mostly known in the modern age for the use of helping with depression. And I love the folklore around it is that it sort of is absorbing the power of the sun at its peakest, sort of at its strongest. And so during the winter, when you're lower, when you haven't had as much sun, the vitamin D that might lift your spirits, this can come in and support your spirit. Another fascinating quality is that it can make you more sensitive to sun. So you have to be careful when you're harvesting it that you're not, you're careful about your exposure, because it can make you more prone to sunburn, which I find fascinating. So if it makes you more sensitive to sun and you're taking it in the winter, that means you're likely able to access more of the ultraviolet rays or the radiation that you need to convert and create vitamin D. So there's a logic that in the folk telling of this plant that makes a lot of sense. And today we're finding it's only like science and traditional knowledge are only starting to come together. Scientists are starting to look back at traditional knowledge and seeing that their research is actually affirming this, what the traditionals have known for millennia. What's another one that's really interesting? This one, This plant is rue, and I just sort of discovered it when I came to the garden. If you were to be able to come and smell this, you would understand why I would think it was a strewing herb, because it has quite the smell. And strewing herbs were used to keep away rodents and bugs. But there's another strewing herb here called meadowsweet, which is the opposite. It's meadowsweet over here. I think it was Queen Victoria who asked her room to be swept with meadowsweet. So it's a strewing herb, but it has the most heavenly smell of vanilla. It's lovely, and it was used to, it was used in many ways. So there were some Viking graves that were discovered, and it's possible that the person was a shamanic or medicine person, but they found meadowsweet in the grave with them. So it was a very special plant. It still is. I love it dried with like a bitter chamomile tea. Like with chamomile, it softens the bitterness, so it's a lovely strewing herb as well. So this one is Wormwood, and it's another bitter, and it's drying as well. I've heard of it being used for worms and parasites. It's not something you could use a lot of, like maybe one cup of tea a week sort of thing. And so it's very strong. It has some very strong alkaloids that could be a problem if you take a lot of it, but you need to take a lot of it. And so underneath the wormwood is comfrey, and we use comfrey as a tea. So we actually use the flowers and the leaves, and we put it in a pot with water, and we let it sit until it smells really bad. And when it's really stinky, that's when we know it's ready, and we pour it as a fertilizer in the garden. It also has strong alkaloids, so very, we'd say no internal loose. Some experienced herbalists could use it, would know how to use it, but generally it's not used internally. But it has been used very effectively for broken bones. It can be used externally on broken bones, and can be very helpful. And behind the wormwood is mugwort. I know mugwort as a dreaming herb, so I know it as something that will help with dreams. So you won't be able to catch the plant here, but there's this really beautiful patch of lady's mantle. And lady's mantle is a woman's herb, and it helps with cramping for menstrual cramping. And I believe it has sort of a modulating effect, so if you're bleeding too much, it will help slow it down, and if you're not, it will sort of help bring the bleeding on if you're not sort of moving through your cycles smoothly. Back here we have echinacea, which most people are used to. We just planted these last year, and so next year the roots will be ready to harvest. And so we harvest the roots, and we use echinacea mainly for immune support. And so whenever I'm feeling a cold or a little strep, something, I will lean heavily on echinacea, and honestly, usually within a day or two, the soreness is gone. So we all have bacteria and viruses and lots of living organisms in and outside of our body, and we have learned to live in in balance with them. But sometimes we get thrown off balance, and when that happens, then bacteria and viruses that are naturally occurring can get out of balance, can sort of, let's say, grow too much or indiscriminately. So these medicines help us bring the balance back into our gut or into our our extracystal fluids. Let me think. Oh, well, Chansey is another one that I understood mainly as a strewing herb. It will repel bugs and mice, but it's also antibacterial and antimicrobial. So it was used when they made haggis, because it would kill, like they would stuff the haggis with the herbs and let it sit, and the herbs would kill the parasites or the bacteria that would be there. You can't catch this right now, but the amount of activity that is going on right in this mint is fantastic. Like, there's thousands of bugs here. I'm just amazed at the life. It's buzzing. So cool. So behind the marshmallow we have Ella Campagne, which is a warming herb. So if marshmallow is cooling and demulsifying, and Ella Campagne is warming, and it will help. It's an expectorant, so it's really great for a congested cough where things are not moving. It will help stimulate a cough and getting rid of the mucus, excess mucus. What else can we talk about? Well, this is lemon balm, which most people are very familiar with. It's a calming plant. It's a lovely calming nervine tea, as is this one. This one down here is skullcap, and as the name, it is like putting on a warm blanket on your head. So it will help calm the mind. So it's a nervine, it's calming, it's cooling, and it just makes a lovely nightcap. If you have any trouble sleeping, I would definitely go for the skullcap or the lemon balm. But I just discovered skullcap last year, so I'm a big fan now. And so we don't have a lot of indigenous plants here, but this one was here. I'm not sure how it found its way, but it's sweet Cecile, and it's again, it's like if you could smell what I smell, you would be amazed, sort of transported. It's like a very gentle anise or licorice. It's very sweet. The seed pods, unfortunately, oh, here we go. We have a few, but it's a little past. The seed pods can be candied, so we can just put them in sugar and let them dry in sugar, and then they are candied. They're just really yummy. What else? Oh, well, Hutchison has the most amazing rose beds. Like, the roses are phenomenal, and I just want to speak on behalf of the roses and say that they are more than their beauty. The rose family has given us the apple tree, the raspberries. The family of roses is profoundly generous, and the roses can be, we make all kinds of confectionery with the rose petals, and the medicine of the rose is supposed to be very good for the heart. It's very gentle. And the rose hips, which are just starting to make themselves known now, are just excellent sources of vitamin C. So they are, yeah, roses were a source of food and not just a pretty face. So what else? So wood betony is also a nervine, it's interesting, a lot of plants are helpful for troubled hearts and a troubled mind, and are very calming. And you can see, I mean, to this day it's hard to go to a doctor and get adequate sort of support for a troubled mind, right? It's difficult, but it's nice to know that there are actually resources that are available to us that have been used throughout time and really do work. Yeah. Let's see. So we have bay laurel in the middle, which I actually don't know of many uses of other than the culinary ones. But even, yeah, so I'm continuing to learn. There's just so much to learn. But this garden has so much to offer. I also like to bring attention to that linden tree. So we have an apple tree and a linden tree, and the linden blossoms. And you can see that, you may not be able to catch it, but they're yellow, and they're very pretty yellow-white flowers when they're in bloom. And that's when the flowers need to be harvested. And they make a beautiful tea. And it's really good for high blood pressure. I have high blood pressure, and so I drink linden tea every day. And so the linden would have been used for their flowers, for the medicine. There are many uses, like the wood it's basswood, so it's the softest of the hardwoods, and so it was favored by carving, people that carve. And there's also beautiful fiber that can be made from linden, from basswood, for clothing. And the apples, I just want to bring attention to the apple, because the apples would be it's very easy to make apple cider vinegar, and one of the primary ways in which the medicinal qualities of these plants would have been preserved through the winter would have been through either apple cider vinegar or a medicinal wine, like it could be like the meadowsweet could be added to wine. And then, of course, there was the drying. But the apple cider vinegar is an important way in which herbs and the medicinal qualities of herbs could be incorporated into the everyday food that that they were consuming at the time. So that's about all I can think of at the moment. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Also, you would always be welcome to join us in the garden. Our group likes to, we learn as we do. There is just no beginning and no end to what there is to learn about these plants. And so we've found the most joy in learning as we go. And if you want to learn more about these plants, then please join us, because there are a number of people with some mobility issues that love herbs that have come out, and as we garden, they sit, and we have tea, and so even if you don't have a lot of physical capacity, you're still welcome to join us, because gardening is much more fun with company. So come out or drop me a line. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.